All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Julius Austin. I am the manager of the Sacramento Promise Zone of Resident Services of the Resident Training Program in Section 3 for Sacramento Housing and Redevelopment Agency, the lead agency for the Sacramento Promise Zone. I want to welcome you all to this really awesome Climate Resilience Hub information session. We have a great agenda for you all, but it's a very short agenda. We're going to do some welcoming, some introductions. I want to say some thank yous off top to some partners who have helped put this together and are probably the reason why you're in the space. And then we'll have a question and answer session, and then we'll close up and get you all out of here in a timely fashion. So first, I want to thank Russell Lowry with the Environmental Justice League. He is probably the reason why you are here. Him and his organization and partners did a great job of doing the outreach and the engagement to invite folks and inform folks about this session. So I just want to give him a moment to say hello.
Yes, Russell Lowry representing the Environmental Justice League, and we thank you for showing up. Since our founding, the Environmental Justice League has been convinced that climate change is real, it's happening, and it's impacting our communities disproportionately. And importantly, these communities need to be at the front of the line as we begin to address climate change. And so you're going to get a ton of great information that's going to make our communities more resilient. What we're absolutely committed to is working collaboratively across associations to bring your strengths to bear to make our Black communities stronger. And we won't let organizational jealousies get in the way at all. We want to serve as a conduit to get climate change capacity and resources to make our community stronger. And toward that end, as you digest this information, free to ask questions, you are free to work independently. But what we're offering you and what we're funding is if you need help, if you need access, if you're an experienced partner and you need to connect with community groups that are active and busy in the community, we will serve as that bridge for you, which will strengthen your grant application. And then for organizations, groups, and people that I've talked to, that I've recruited, that are on this call, who maybe don't feel like they have the capacity to go for grants individually, the Environmental Justice League will handhold you through that process. We will be submitting grant applications, and we will do that with you or connect you with other groups that are on this call that are willing to work with you in that capacity. So digest the information, own it, ask your questions, and just know that the same outreach we did to get you on this call will be available to handhold you through the process afterwards. At the end of the day, we want this grant money to impact our frontline communities. We're passionate about that, and we want to help you do that.
All right. Thank you so much, Russell. So let me do some ground setting before I introduce my awesome partner in the Promise Zone who's going to lead this presentation because he's been leading the effort in regards to climate resilience hubs. But the Sacramento Promise Zone is a federal designation that was awarded to Sacramento Housing and Redevelopment Agency back in 2015. It is a place-based initiative that's focused on parts of North, Mid, and South Sacramento, pretty large area, 22 square mile area. I'll put our website in the chat so you can learn some more information if anybody wants even further information beyond the website. I'll put my contact information. But ultimately what the Promise Zone is an initiative that President Obama created that initially said, what would happen if we recognize that there are some areas across the United States that have been marginalized, underserved, and therefore have unfortunate outcomes, negative outcomes in areas such as education, health, workforce development, economic development, housing, community revitalization, violence and crime, and so much more, unfortunately. But not just recognizing it, what can we do to create solutions? And the first part of the solution would be on the federal level, what would happen if federal agencies got out of their silos and helped to create and collaborate more to help funnel more resources, whether that be grant opportunities, technical assistance, or otherwise to the most distressed areas of the country, which ultimately was decided to be 22 promise zones across the country. There are four rural, four tribal, and 14 urban promise zones, and we're fortunate enough to be one here in Sacramento. So we know that that would be great, right? If there was more federal focus, more federal funding, more federal technical assistance, but that could only be the first layer. The next layer is the most important layer, and you all fit into that layer. So the next question or the next resolution would be, what if locally, and say, for example, in Sacramento, right, since we're here, that's what we're talking about. What if leaders from across all sectors, so all of our elected officials, our nonprofit leaders, our school district leaders, our college and university leaders, our business leaders, small and large businesses, what if our business chambers and PBIDs and neighborhood associations, what if leaders in general got out of their silos, collaborated more to create great projects, programs, and initiatives that was focused on the distressed areas? And what if they focus the existing things that they have already going on the areas that we know needed the most? And that's what the Promise Zone is all about. And our role with the Promise Zone is to be the catalyst to increase that collaborative efforts, to be the facilitator of higher level collaboration. We help form strategic partnerships. We help share information and resources out to leaders so that they are aware of what's going on across the landscape. We also try to do a little bit of effort of focusing on sharing resources out to the community directly as well. But our major target audience is leaders such as yourselves. We also provide access and information about federal grant opportunities and non-federal grant opportunities. And ultimately, we provide letters of support for folks who are pursuing grants that will impact either the entire Promise Zone or a portion of the Promise Zone. And then the efforts could be 100% focused on the Promise Zone, or only a percentage of the efforts could be focused. So it doesn't have to be, your efforts don't have to be totally focused on the Promise Zone, just as long as it's part of it. And ultimately what that does is ultimately helps to increase the probability of folks receiving grants, because they have the opportunity to say, I'm focusing on low to moderate income communities, I'm focused on marginalized communities, I'm focused on underserved communities, but I'm not only doing it by myself, I'm doing it in a space where there are hundreds of other partners who are working, collaborating to change outcomes in all those 5 focus areas that I mentioned earlier, which once again are education, health, workforce development, economic development, in an area that we call sustainably built communities that includes housing, community revitalization, opportunities for arts and cultural expression, neighborhood safety, and violence prevention. One of the great, now I wish I could say the Promise Zone initiative came with hundreds of millions or maybe billions of dollars, but it did not. Like I said, it came with the opportunity to have really deep relationships with federal agencies, an opportunity to have a greater opportunity to win federal grants. And it came with, which I believe is the greatest asset, is a community liaison, which is my main man, Dr. Michael Huff, who is going to be presenting today. Our community liaison, his role is to help navigate the federal landscape, help funnel more resources into the Promise Zone. And he has done a wonderful job of that. And one of the examples is that he's led the charge on educating and empowering Sacramento leaders about climate resilience hubs. And before I make the last introduction of him, to let him take over this presentation, I just want to say why we're doing this, right? We recognize that climate change is real, but we also recognize when there are natural disasters, when there are things like the COVID-19 pandemic, we know that those marginalized communities are most impacted and disproportionately impacted. I think most recently we all can remember what took place in January here in Sacramento with the flooding and et cetera. And you can imagine power outages, lack of access to food and et cetera, which communities were impacted most. Now, we recognize that when I say marginalized communities are impacted, we know that oftentimes are many communities, and especially communities of color. So we have done work and will continue to do work to educate and empower and create resiliency for all of those communities. But today, what we are doing is focusing on the Black community, because the Black community oftentimes is the most impacted, right? So we want to make sure we place some special focus on educating and empowering folks who are going to help create resiliency for the Black community. So without further ado, let me click you over to the next slide so you can get a little bit of information about the Promise Zone. But more importantly, it's time for me to introduce our awesome speaker today, my awesome partner and awesome friend, Dr. Michael Huff.
Hey, thank you very much, Julius, and thank you, Russell, for setting the table. I'm just going to jump right in. You can see a little bit of information about me there. But the one thing I'll point out is that my background pre-HUD is as a professional in what's called business continuity planning, or continuity of operations is what they call it in the federal space. But so being proactive and building preparedness is something that I have been doing for most of my professional career. That's why I'm excited to share with you about the Climate Resilience Hub. We can go on to the next slide. So I'm going to cover a number of things about a Climate Health Resilience Hub and try to give you some insights on what that is and how we're doing a pilot at the La Familia Counseling Center in Sacramento. And just so you know, this is something that is federal agencies had to prepare proposals on how they would provide climate resilience, how they would prepare for that. And then also there's resources for building climate resilience in communities across the country. As you can look at, most of you've seen the weather. I just saw in the chat that someone's getting hail in Los Angeles. And you know, there's a winter storm hitting most of the Northwest. At the same time, crazy stuff is happening in the Midwest. And in the Southeast is going through, you know, unbelievable heat, you know. So we know that the climate impact is here, and what this goal is to do is to actually build. Snowed in Oakland this morning. You know, this is crazy. So this Climate Health Resilience Hub is actually set to, it's tied to the social determinants of health. And the social determinants of health actually cover and interact with, and we'll send something out about that, but it interacts with all of the things Julius mentioned: education, health, jobs, communities, food systems. All of those things impact health. And so the reason I mention that is that I'm working closely with HHS, CDC on the Climate Health Resilience Hubs and with FEMA. And the thing that is most important is that these agencies for the first time, including HUD, realize they can't be reactive anymore. They can't say, oh, a disaster hit, let's go do something. No, because disasters and crises are hitting concurrently everywhere at the same time. So that's what we can expect. We're experiencing now, and we can expect more of that in the future. So that's kind of the table setting for why this is something that we're working on. And you can go to the next slide, please. What we want to do is actually take advantage of the fact that, you know, the federal agencies are interested in building resilience, and the fact that the White House had a council put together a federal plan for equitable long-term recovery and resilience. I participate with the leaders of that plan, and we are, you know, really excited to see that there's an interest in doing things across all the federal agencies, and also in communities, specifically communities that are vulnerable. And, you know, I'm as Julia said, I'm really excited because this is Black History Month, and to be able to be providing information that will help our communities during Black History Month is just really an opportunity I appreciate. Let's go on to the next slide, please. And Julius is going to show a quick video to kind of just give you a visual of what resilience hubs can look like. What are some of the things they have? Not seeing it yet, Jude. Oh, okay, here we go. It's just a visual representation, but you can kind of see. You have an existing community center covered with solar power or off-grid. It provides communications in a disaster emergency, clean water, it may have gardens and farming or for a food source. It has risk reduction and disaster training. So that's taking an existing community hub, which could be any trusted location. Some of the places we're interacting with across the country, we just had a meeting in St. Louis yesterday, and they're looking at faith-based organizations, firehouses, community centers, and some of these organizations are doing, you know, they're already doing some things in the community. Maybe they're doing workforce development, and they're open to adding additional opportunities. We'll go back to we can go to the next slide, Julius. So that gave you a background of what, just a visual representation of Climate Resilience Hub. What I want to do now is actually show you what we're doing at La Familia. At La Familia, we're doing what's called a Climate Health Resilience Hub, and we're actually integrating health into it, so that you have a place that has multiple federal agencies, state agencies, NGOs, academic partners are all working toward the same goal. Even if they hadn't been working that way in the past, they're working that way now. And the goal is preventing or mitigating the impacts of climate change on people. However, there's a great variation, you know, of how each climate resilience hub will actually operate. You know, some places that we're looking at will actually be able to have all of these things involved. We'll be able to have the clinical or public services. So the reason I mentioned clinical or public health services, because we saw La Familia pivot. They normally provide workforce and education and some opportunities for kids, but behavioral health became something that's important as we dealt with the pandemic. And so they were able to communicate with a federal health center, FQHC, and start to work to have resources so that they could have those type of services available to the community. You'll see also that La Familia we've linked them with information about hazard mitigation and working with the county to look at providing, being a microgrid, being a location that would have its own backup power, would have broadband, additional broadband resources, could be a heating or cooling center. As we know, we're dealing with cold right now, but we know the summer is going to come, and that heat, that we've experienced will probably be an issue. And clean air and clean water. So the interesting thing is there are resources in the federal agencies, as we go through a little bit later, that you'll see that actually are interested in providing resources and technical assistance for all of the things I just mentioned. And what's nice is that, let's say this community center is providing just, let's say, job training or tutoring for young people. That's what they do normally. They continue to do that. However, when a crisis comes, they actually have resources and have connections that are pre-positioned and pre-developed that they can launch right away. And that's a goal. And as Julius and Russell mentioned, the goal is actually to make this so that there are relationships, so that, let's say we have a climate resilience hub at La Familia. La Familia knows they can't be everywhere at the same time. So they're doing what they can in their community. Their plan is to network with you all, with the other climate health resilience hubs across Sacramento. The same conversation is being had in Philadelphia. We had a presentation over at Region 3 with Philadelphia. They're going to be doing the same thing. The same thing is happening through the Minneapolis area, through St. Louis, as I mentioned. Southern California, we have 2 promise zones that we're in communication with as well. And what's interesting, you'll see that Promise Zone, the Climate Health Resilience Hub, is at a trusted place-based location. Just think in your community of the trusted locations, the places that actually during the pandemic provided a preview of what additional things they could do. For example, they provided testing, they provided vaccinations, and now we're seeing some of these trusted locations being sources for food, because food insecurity is a big deal. And La Familia has pivoted to do some of that. And it's a location that you have interaction with the community. The community knows that they can come for resources and also provide information, kind of an open dialogue back and forth. And let's see what else I wanted to point out for this. So the clinical piece is one, the health piece is one that would be really helpful to look at. If you did things related to vaccinations or vaccines or testing, maybe you have a relationship with public health already. They have resources to actually move things forward. Next slide, please. So this just goes into some of the things that La Familia has been working on to expand. You can see mental health. Obviously, mental health is something that has become something that's really important. So some counseling, there are resources to add that type of service. And what's nice about it is the Climate Health Resilience Hub is not saying to you, hey, we want you to take on things and provide them without resources and stretch your people and do X, Y, Z. These federal agencies and partners are actually coming and saying, we know that you need resources and capacity. So they have the resources to add this because it's a mandate. It's something that has to be done. What I did was just point out the Promise Zone and say, hey, the Promise Zones already have these collaborative relationships. They already are doing things in the community. They're already trusted. They're already vetted by the Obama administration. And now they've been tested by the pandemic and they've come through and as a community support. And you'll see right at the last one, there are some things. There's what's called a youth-centered program, and there's a youth resilience corps that actually develops youth to be like first responders in communities and to be trained. And so there are resources to build that type of collaboration. Let's have the next slide, please. And this slide just gives you kind of an idea of all of the agencies who are part of the federal, that federal program to actually put together a long-term resilience plan. These are all the ones that contributed and said that they have resources to do that. Obviously, there's no expectation for anyone to take advantage of all of these. The goal is for each organization and partner to look at it and say, hey, we're doing X, Y, Z. We'd like to focus on expanding what we're doing, and then down the road, adding these additional services because our community could use them. Next slide. And this is just a continuation of more partners. The thing I'll say on this slide is that the issue is that climate change and the issues of it is not something that anyone is necessarily debating in the government. You know, all the agencies are seeing it. You know, the pandemic proved that. What's happening with sourcing issues related to Ukraine, related to food, related to avian flu, I mean, who knew eggs could be something we couldn't find, you know? And so all of these things have made this a reality. And so that's why the resources are something that our goal was to educate you about the fact that climate health resilience hubs are an option, and we'd like you to be aware of it so that you can have a chair at the table. Next slide, please. I know I went through it a lot, but I want to open it up, make sure you have time for questions. I turn it back to you, Julius and Russell.
All right, thank you so much, Dr. Huff, for that presentation and for educating and empowering folks about the great resources that are out there available. I want to make it clear that this is a great opportunity for organizations who are already embedded in communities to take advantage of these resources a la carte. You don't have to become a full on center that encompasses all of the things we shared: access to food, access to Wi-Fi, access to water, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Although it would be great, the greatest impact would be if someone had the capacity to do all the above. But what you can do is just be a part of a network of resources that help our communities be prepared for and thriving prior to disasters, pandemics, et cetera, and then provide the opportunity for people to maintain through these issues when we know they're coming, and then provide the opportunity for people to recover once we make it through these types of situations. So really would love to hear from you all. Would love to provide an opportunity for you to ask questions, provide for you an opportunity for you to make any comments that may have kind of popped into your head during the presentation. We will be sending out this recording to everyone and also the slides. I know a couple folks have asked that in the chat. I want to make sure everyone is aware of that. But anyone have any questions, feel free to unmute yourself and pose your question. You can use the raise hand button like what main man Kaim has already done, or you can throw your question in the chat. So let's start it off with Kaim. Kaim, would you like to unmute yourself and pose your question?
Yeah, thank you very much. Really appreciate the presentation and the information. There was one item that Dr. Huff went over in his presentation on the example for La Familia when they kind of pivoted in terms of how they were helping their community. And kind of like from with that, I just wanted to know even though we're kind of focused a little bit more on the Sacramento region, what's the size of the area of the region that you would look for a center to cover or a hub to really cover?
But Dr. Huff, I'll let you take it first, and I can chime in on it as well.
Yeah, I would say that it's within their capacity, and just if you can imagine, for example, a fire station. There are fire stations across every city, and they are they are actually established so that they can be able to service within like 4 to 8 minutes or something to anywhere. So if a community is able to have, the last thing I'll say is, just to make it easy, the more the merrier, because climate resilience issues are hitting everywhere. So, the more the merrier, whatever the capacity can be.
Right, I'll add to that, Kaim. So of course, what Dr. Huff is saying in regards to capacity is right on point. It's kind of whatever area, whatever reach an organization may have. But ultimately, our goal is to create a network of resilience hubs that are spattered across our promise zone, our city, our county, our region, so that there's resilience for our entire region. Something that's important to think about is, when these things happen, oftentimes what takes place and what creates the greater marginalization is the lack of resources in regards to transportation, et cetera, funding to travel a further distance. And so that's why it's very important for us to do the work to create as many hubs as possible. If we had a really great hub, like for example, at La Familia, imagine how many people who live in the northern areas of Sacramento would really, really struggle to take advantage of the great resources they have down in the south areas. So Tamara, your question, please.
Oh, hi, it's Tamara from 40 Acre.
Sorry, Tamara.
That's okay. Hi, good morning. What, I noticed that in California, there's a limited amount of designated promise zones. My community, specifically Oakland, is not a promise zone. I just saw the Hub website, but it was a finalist. Can a climate resiliency hub exist outside of a designated promise zone?
Yes. So the exciting thing is the goal is to get these across the country as far as many places as possible. So I've actually shared with my partners in HHS and HUD and other parts of the government, and they're excited about it. The fact that there are designated promise zones, as Julius mentioned, but there are promise zone finalists. And they know I have already been notifying them about Oakland, about Hayward, about Stockton in NorCal, and I've notified them about applicants, the people that applied to be promise zones but didn't make it for whatever reason. And so they're looking at urban, rural, and tribal settings because all of these settings need it. So yes, for sure, even if you're not a designee, you've been identified.
Thank you. I just one follow-up question. Some of our projects for 40 Acre are outside of, in California, we have the, sorry, I'm drawing a blank. It's not called the climate zone, the screen. Someone help me with the words on the right now.
Cal Enviro screen.
Cal Enviro screen. Thank you. Which it gives a community an advantage based on health disparities, number of students, that receive free lunch, and amount of unemployed and below poverty level. But if a community doesn't show up on Cal Enviro screen because it's not considered poverty, but there's a need there because of what historical racism.
Hi, it's Marianne. Hi, that's weird. I don't know what it is because I'm just sitting here at my.
Sorry about that.
Sorry, that's okay. Then how would a group create, like build a project that would be eligible for the hub?
We can actually talk about that offline, but any kind of collaborative relationships would be an option, definitely.
Thank you.
So I want to acknowledge, Russell, I see your hand is raised, but prior to your hand being raised, Marie Samuels posed a question in the chat. So I want to go over that. First, Marie says, thank you for sharing the information. This is very helpful and thinking about a hub. He says he would like to hear more about how La Familia access the resources to establish and maintain the hub, Dr. Huff.
So we had a what's called a stone soup session at La Familia, where we invited out the federal agencies and to look at them being a pilot. And Julius was there, and the Promise Zone was there, and we had representatives from the state and the city. And so what we did is we had La Familia identify what their priorities were and set up actual work groups. And the first priority was related to food insecurity. And there are a number of other things I'd have to see, but the first step is actually kind of looking forward at where you are, what your skill set is, and then looking at what agencies kind of tie into that. So if that's information you have, we can kind of work together to identify what types of grants and resources would be available. But you have to kind of do your own gap analysis or of what your community needs and what you're able to do. And then we can plug in resources for that.
All right.
Thanks a lot for that.
answers.
Yep.
And just know that Maurice and everyone else, we wanted to just kind of provide some initial information for everyone to understand what resilience hubs are, understand what the potential resources that might be available. But we know that this was just going to be an introduction. So feel free to reach out to us. We will make ourselves available to have deeper, more detailed discussions individually or with any collaborative as well. Russell, did you have a question that you wanted to propose before I turn it over to Bob Huff for his question?
Well, I think I will close. I know we're coming to a close, and you're a stickler for the time, but I think it's important for you to speak to, or maybe Dr. Huff to speak to, setting up a new hub if Sierra Health wanted to do that. That doesn't in any way negatively impact La Familia's ability to set up a hub. That the work, explain the relationship between multiple hubs and why we need to be about this work. That's not something that is normal in our community.
Yeah, thank you for stating that, Russell. So I think what you're alluding to is the fact that normally, in a community like Sacramento, where there are kind of one of the highest rates of nonprofits per capita, a lack of Fortune 500 companies, a lack of major philanthropic organizations, and a lack of four-year universities, et cetera, which those things oftentimes bring more resources into a community. But in that environment, we sometimes are little hold things, cut stuff tight to our chest, or we are competing vastly for resources. But in this situation, that's not necessarily the case. What the goal is, as we stated earlier, is to create as many organizations that can serve as resilience hubs as possible. And therefore, when you look at the types of resources that are available from the funding agencies, they are looking to disperse the resources until they are gone for any entity who meets the qualifications and the criteria for the funding. So we want as many people to apply for the different types of resources as possible. So you are right in regards to the time. I won't be a stickler today, though. What I recognize is that these are this is an important topic, and there are some great questions that folks may have. So I want to be respectful of those who need to leave the space. We understand that, but if we could ask your permission to continue on with the question and answer session, please feel free to stay as we turn it over to Bob Huff for your question, sir.
Thank you, Julius. Appreciate it. I'll lower my hand. So Nudo is an electric vehicle charging solutions provider. And, as we continue to have more wildfires, earthquakes, hurricanes, they all disrupt power. The government has already recognized that we are energizing our disadvantaged communities at a much lower rate, with recharging facilities than we are other areas that are driving their Teslas. And that's going to change. Within 12 years, we have, in California at least, a mandate that all sales of vehicles shall be electric, so except for some hybrids, they're already jacking up the price on internal combustion engines. So just as you're making your thoughts, your presentations, keep in mind about electric vehicles, because not only do disadvantaged communities not have access, particularly in multifamily dwelling units, so we could already be providing, and 40 to 60% of grant money, federal grant money, is targeted toward disadvantaged communities. So keep that in mind. And then if we build in a battery backup supply that can also power the facility and charge emergency vehicles or vehicles used to reach out to those that are being negatively impacted. So we'd love to partner with you. Just wanted to shout that out, and appreciate all you're doing.
Well, I will just jump in real fast and say that that ties in directly with what the Department of Transportation is doing, and it ties into some things that La Familia is doing, and that our partners want to replicate across the country, is the ability to have the charging stations, but also train people within communities to actually manage them, to work on them, and so that's a workforce development piece that the Department of Labor is interested in. And obviously anything that happens with the climate and disasters, the power is going to need to be there, and that's why the microgrid is something they're working to be tied into the emergency plans for, and that's something that they're looking to have. So definitely thank you for mentioning the electrical power, because that's definitely something that's on the table and being looked at.
Yeah, and furthermore, it is definitely on the mindset of the Sacramento Promise Zone and Sacramento Housing and Redevelopment Agency. You might be pleased to know, Bob, that Sacramento Housing and Redevelopment Agency was the first public housing authority to partner to install EV vehicle infrastructure and provide EV vehicle access to public housing residents. And we also work with other partners to do the same type of efforts in other low-income housing community areas. So definitely an important thing. And I want to give a shout out to Green Tech. I see Doretha is on the line, and they've done some great work in pursuing some EV vehicle infrastructure and use for the community as well. So great addition to the conversation. Anyone else have questions? All right. Don't be shy. All right. Well, thank you so much for you all being here. Thank you once again to Russell and Environmental Justice League for partnering to do great outreach and engagement to inform people about this session. Thank you to Dr. Michael Huff for presenting to us today and for continuing to lead the efforts in educating and empower our communities about the Resilience Hub resources. We will be sharing out the recording of this session for all attendees and for those who registered and RSVP with the Environmental Justice League. We also will be sharing out the PowerPoint slides in the PDF format, so you can have that information as well. I hope you all have a great remainder of your day. Stay resilient, stay strong, and continue to help those communities that need it the most. Take care.